So do you actually know how to properly study for classes, specifically hard pre-med classes? It's time for another good old study video, study strategies, and the science behind learning how to learn. If you're new here, my name is Dr. Nessim. I'm the founder of the Premed Consultants, and we're going to break down how you should be approaching studying for your classes in today's video. Now, this is a topic that students don't really like that much. A lot of students feel that they have their way, and a lot of times most students really just brute force studying, and ultimately they don't see the best results when using outdated methods. And it also takes up so much of their time that you're constantly feeling stressed, as if you have to pull all-nighters and really don't have any time for fun, hanging out, relaxing, or other extracurriculars that you want to do. So in today's video, I'm going to try to talk about some evidence-based techniques that you can start implementing that will hopefully free up a little bit more of your time as a pre-med student. But before I do that, let's talk about how most students study for college and for the MCAT. A lot of it is actually just brute forcing and using ineffective methods that make it a lot harder to comprehend and memorize information. Now, the goal, of course, is to always understand all the information, but in pre-med, and you'll see in med school, there's also a lot of memorization too that doesn't require as much comprehension, but truly just memorizing. Now, should this be the case? That's a topic for another day, but the reality is you do have to memorize a lot of info if you're going through the path of becoming a doctor. Now, what most students do to try and memorize information is they read the textbooks, they highlight, and they ferociously take notes. I know people that literally basically rewrite the entire textbook because they're just taking notes on everything they see. The problem is that's an ineffective method. That's actually very passive. Looking at what you're reading and then rewriting it, while it might help a little bit in terms of your memorization, most studies show that this is ineffective, especially when compared to other techniques that we're going to get into later. And one of the reasons for this is, let's say you're highlighting what you think is the important parts of the textbook, or you're taking notes on what the most important parts that you deem are. That's good because it's helping you synthesize the information and have to think and extract the high yield info. But most students don't ever go back to those highlights or in their notes, maybe more than one time. And so this becomes very ineffective. Additionally, a lot of students show up to lecture for class with no understanding of what the material they're going to be taught that day is about, and are unable to stay focused throughout the entire duration of the lecture, which I totally understand. You know, some of those lectures can be long, drawn out. They're an hour, 2 hours, even 3 hours, and it's hard to stay attentive and really use that as their first pass through the material. So what most students do is they go to lecture, they doze off, and then they're like, I'm going to go study this later tonight. And then later that night, they're starting to finally try and teach themselves the material. So that's actually their first pass of the information. But what if you reverse that? And instead, you studied the material before lecture. So you got up early and you looked over what the lecture is, the topics. You kind of made an outline in your mind of what you're going to be learning. You don't need to read everything about that topic or completely teach it to yourself. I mean, the more you do, the better. But having just a framework for what you're going to be studying and knowing maybe some of the high yield definitions and really kind of just understand the terminology of whatever topic you're about to be taught. And then you go to lecture, and now instead of taking notes and highlighting and writing every single thing down that the lecturer says, just sit back, relax, and try to enjoy and follow along with the lecture and fill in the gaps that you didn't understand from before. Now that would actually be your second pass through the material, and by knowing the material going in, it lets you stay more focused during the lecture. And then later that night, if you want to do a quick summary or review, that's actually going to be the third pass of that material. So if you take this approach, you're on pass 3 of the material when your peers are only on pass 1. Now, if you couple this with active recall and spaced repetition, I personally like using Anki flashcards for this because it has an algorithm that lets you see the material exactly when you need to see it. This is a recipe for success. So for those of you that don't know what Anki is basically this flashcard app. It has a spaced repetition algorithm. And so let's say you get a question and you get that question right today. Then you're going to see it tomorrow. If you get it right tomorrow, you might see that question in 3 days. And then if you get it right in a week, and then 2 weeks, and then a month. And so it keeps pushing the information you know farther and farther back into your memory and when you have to study it. And the information that you're getting wrong, so let's say on day 5 you got that question wrong, well, now you're going to see it tomorrow again, and then only in 3 days. And so basically the Anki algorithm sorts the information you need to see more, you see more frequently, and the information you need to see less, you see less frequently. Now, you don't only have to use Anki to be able to do this type of spaced repetition. You can make your own flashcards and try to keep it organized. I think that utilizing the algorithm of technology with Anki, or I know even Quizlet I think has an algorithm like this, and there's other flashcard apps that are popping up. No matter what you use, as long as it works for you and you stay consistent with it, that's the key. You have to be consistent with it. You're going to have a much better job of memorizing the information that hopefully you first understood. And that's the key as well. Don't do flashcards randomly. Do it after you've studied that material so you understand the context behind the cards. Additionally, it's very important to do practice questions early on. Practice questions are one of the best ways to learn material, to synthesize it, and to learn from your mistakes. And so most students in class, for example, they never do practice questions until the practice test that they get from the professor, like 4 days, maybe even like the day before the real exam. But that's not the best way to use a practice test. That's using the test as an evaluation tool of, oh, what will you likely score on the test if you took it today? You want to be taking the practice test many weeks before your exams, so that way you can see how the professor likes to test the material, or how, for example, the MCAT likes to test the material, and then what your weaknesses are so you could focus in on those and actually study and see what your improvements are. So it's okay if you take the same practice test 2 or even 3 times before your class exams. If you can get all the questions right on that practice exam, you're going to be much better off when you take the real thing, because sometimes those real tests are just variations of the practice test. Not always, but even if the real test is different, you know that if you see anything similar to the practice test, you're going to ace it because you've gotten all those questions right. And now a lot of students are like, oh, I don't want to take it 2 times. I remember the answers. But when I ask students to take the test, let's say 4 weeks out, and then take it 1 week out, that means they should get a perfect score on that practice test. And most of the times, students do not get a perfect score on that practice test, even 1 week out. So maybe you went from getting a 60 to an 80. Well, now that last 20%, that's a good opportunity to figure out what your biggest weak areas are, study it, and make sure you get those 20% of questions right as well. So definitely utilizing questions early on is the key to having an effective study strategy. And this is exactly how we have our pre-med students study for the MCAT. So instead of doing practice tests only later on, we have them doing UWorld questions on a daily basis from day 1 of their prep. And so you get many more questions done before your actual MCAT. And there's good evidence to show that students that do more unique practice questions, this goes for MCAT and USMLE exams when you get to the board exams in medical school, the students that have done more unique questions have ultimately higher scores. And then most importantly, doing of the question itself is not where the big improvements come. It's to the review of the questions later on where you'll see the biggest improvement. So you need to make sure that if you don't understand a topic, you're going and looking up the definitions. You're watching a content video. If you like learning from textbooks, you open up the page in the textbook chapter and reread that part. But now you have more context. You just did a question. Now you're going to read about it. It's going to stick a lot better than if you just try and read an entire chapter on, let's say, acid bases or titration in chemistry. Actually doing questions first, that extra context really does help. And that's why I don't recommend, especially if students have already seen material. For example, when you're studying for the MCAT, you've already seen a lot of the information because you've taken those pre-med classes. You don't need to go back and reread every part of every textbook. You should be doing questions, and then where you don't know things, then you go to the textbook or the content videos or whatever other resource you like to use to relearn that information. All right, so in summary, the days of highlighting and just rewriting notes are out. The days of using evidence-based study strategies such as active recall, spaced repetition. Also, it's important to try and draw connections between topics. That's very helpful. And doing lots of practice questions from the very beginning and thoroughly reviewing those practice questions. Even if you got tons wrong, that's okay. Don't worry about it. That is going to be a strategy for success as you move forward. Lastly, the last part of this equation is when you are studying, you actually are not distracted. So that means phone in another room turned off. I like to put a self-control app on my computer where it blocks out any websites that can distract me. So YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all these sites, or even if you go on Reddit or SDN or whatever it is, you make it so that you cannot access those sites during the time you want to be studying. So phone's in another room, you can't access sites. Now the only thing you should be able to do is study. It's really a muscle that you need to improve on. So try first doing 30 minutes without any distractions, and go to 40 minutes, then an hour. And then let's say you can do an hour and a half block where maybe you do 45 minutes, take a 5-minute break, then another 45 minutes, and keep working that muscle of attention and focus, because just like going to the gym, you have to lift heavier and heavier weights, progressive overload. It's similar when it comes to studying. If you have never sat down to do multiple hours at a time, it really is hard, and it is a tool that you have to develop. And so try to start with, again, like 20, 30 minutes of real focused work, and then keep increasing it. You'll eventually realize that if you can do exactly what we talked about with these study strategies, as well as actually stay focused for like an hour at a time, that 1 hour of focused work with good study strategies is probably more effective than your 3 or 4 hours of studying where you have other browsers open, you're sitting with friends and chit-chatting throughout. And what this then allows you to do is open up a lot of free time to do other things that you want to do, whether that's just hanging with friends, relaxing, doing other extracurriculars. And overall, it allows you to, as a pre-med student or whatever student you are, absolutely crush your classes, do well, and still have a lot of fun while in school. So hope this video was helpful. If I can get one student to start getting better grades as a result of it, that would be my goal. If you are enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.